It was the way she laughed that night, too loud, too carefree. It grated against my nerves like sandpaper on raw skin. Elena was perched on the edge of our old leather couch, scrolling through her phone with a kind of excitement I hadn't seen in months, not for me anyway. "Greg's picking me up in 20, she said casually, not even bothering to look up. Her tone was flat, like she was giving a weather report. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter. "You really think this is okay?" I asked, my voice low. Her head tilted slightly, her brows arching in mock confusion. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You know exactly what it means," I shot back. "This, whatever it is you and Greg are doing, it's not okay." A smirk tugged at her lips, but there wasn't an ounce of warmth behind it. "Oh, Ethan, don't play innocent," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "We've been broken for years. I'm just the one brave enough to admit it." Brave? That's what she called sneaking around with another man, slipping off into the night like a thief and leaving me to piece together the wreckage of our life. "So what is this?" Then I gestured toward her sparkling gold dress, the one I'd bought her 2 anniversaries ago. "You playing house with Greg now?" She sighed, exasperated. "It's just a party. A swinger party, okay? No strings, no commitments, just adults having fun. You wouldn't understand." And there it was again, that patronizing tone, like I was some clueless schoolboy who couldn't possibly grasp the kind of freedom she craved. I clenched my fist, swallowing the rage bubbling inside me. "Don't bother coming back," I said finally, my voice shaking. "If you walk out that door, we're done." Her smirk widened into a full-blown grin, as if I'd just handed her some kind of victory. "Oh, Ethan, don't make this so dramatic. You'll thank me someday." With that, she grabbed her clutch, swayed to the door, and disappeared into the night. 3 days passed. 3 days of silence. At first, I told myself I didn't care, let her have her fling. But by the second night, when her clothes were still untouched in the closet and her phone went straight to voicemail, unease began to creep in. By the third morning, I'd had enough. I called a lawyer, filed for divorce, and decided to move on. Whatever she was chasing at Greg's arms, or at that damn party, she could have it. 2 weeks later, the silence shattered. The call came just after 8 a.m. I was nursing a bitter cup of coffee, scrolling through emails I didn't care about when my phone buzzed. "Mr. Reynolds," the voice on the other end was clipped, professional. "This is Detective Howard from the Fairfax County Police Department. Do you have a moment to talk about your wife, Elena?" Reynolds. Ex-wife, I thought, but I kept that to myself. "What's this about?" "We believe your wife may be the victim of foul play," he said. "Her last known location was a private residence in Rockford." My chest tightened. "Foul play? What are you talking about?" There was a pause, the kind that makes your blood run cold. She attended a private event on the evening of October 14th. We have reason to believe she never left the property. The party. The one she'd left for with Greg. "Greg," I said aloud. "She was with a guy named Greg." "We're aware of Mr. Mallister," the detective replied. "He's currently under investigation as well. Mr. Reynolds, we'd like you to come down to the station to answer some questions." An hour later, I was at the precinct, my head spinning. Detective Howard met me in a stark grey interview room, his expression grim. He slid a photo across the table, a sprawling mansion with high gates and perfectly manicured hedges. "This is the property where the party took place," he said. "It's owned by a man named Victor. Have you heard of him?" I shook my head. The name meant nothing to me. Howard leaned forward. "Victor Kane is well known in certain circles, wealthy, influential, and notorious for hosting unconventional events." "What do you mean by unconventional?" I asked, my stomach churning. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Sex parties, but more than that, events with darker themes, rumors of violence, coercion, even human trafficking." The room felt like it was spinning. "And you think Elena?" I couldn't finish the sentence. Howard's eyes locked onto mine, unflinching. "We've recovered footage from the party. It shows your wife entering the property, but there's no record of her leaving." My stomach churned, a sickening mix of anger, fear, and something darker I couldn't name. What the hell happened to her? Howard didn't answer right away. Instead, he slid another photo across the table. It was a grainy still from a security camera. Elena, in her gold dress, walking through a grand foyer. Behind her was Greg, but it was the third figure in the frame that made my blood run cold, a shadowy silhouette lurking at the edge. "Who's that?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Howard's face darkened. "We don't know, but whoever it is, we believe they're responsible for what happened next." Victor Kane's infamous parties were the stuff of whispered rumors scattered across obscure forums and shadowy chat groups. Drugs, blackmail. Some even claimed he was untouchable, his immense wealth shielding him from justice. But justice wasn't what I was after when I reached his estate that night. The mansion stood at the center of it all, its windows glowing faintly, like the watchful eyes of a predator. I moved quickly, sticking to the shadows. Elena. Yes, face burned in my mind, her smirk from that night, her gold dress shimmering like fire. Anger propelled me forward, silencing the nagging whispers of doubt. A side door was left ajar, and I slipped inside without hesitation. The air was heavy, thick with the sickly sweet scent of perfume and something metallic. The grand foyer stretched out before me, its polished marble floors reflecting the dim light of a chandelier. The silence inside was even more unsettling. No voices, no music, just the faint hum of electricity. I crept down a corridor lined with closed doors, my ears straining for any sound. Then I heard muffled voices, low and tense. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath to listen. "She shouldn't have fought back," one man said, irritation sharpening his tone. "Victor doesn't tolerate defiance," another replied coolly. "She's not the first." "She won't be the last," the first voice added. "He'll deal with her, just like he did the others." My fists clenched, and rage boiled up inside me. The voices were coming from a study, its double doors slightly ajar. I peered inside. Two men stood near a desk, their suits immaculate, their postures unnervingly relaxed. Between them, a monitor displayed a grainy video feed of a basement. And there she was. "Elena." "Victor wants her gone by morning," one of the men said. "No loose ends." Something inside me snapped, flickering out. "You, the hell are you?" the man spat, struggling against my grip. "Her husband," I growled, slamming his head into the desk. He went limp, sliding to the floor in a heap. I didn't have time to waste. Grabbing the knife, I sprinted down the corridor, following the faint hum of machinery. If the video feed was real, there had to be a way to the basement. At the end of a narrow staircase, I found a locked door. The knife was useless, but a nearby fire axe did the trick. The door splintered under my blows, revealing a cavernous underground space reeking of mildew and despair. Rows of cages lined the walls, most of them empty. But in the far corner, I saw her. "Elena," I shouted, rushing to her side. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. "Ethan," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "Yeah, it's me," I said, cutting through the chains that bound her wrists. "We're getting out of here." I helped her to her feet, but before we could move, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the stairs. Victor Kane. He emerged from the shadows, his presence cold and commanding. Two men flanked him, their expressions blank, their weapons drawn. "You must be Ethan," Victor said, his voice smooth and almost amused. "I've heard so much about you." "You're going to let us go," I said, brandishing the knife. Victor chuckled a low, menacing sound. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." His men moved first. The fight was brutal, a chaotic blur of adrenaline and fury. One of them lunged at me, but I sidestepped, driving the knife into his side. He let out a guttural scream and fell. The other swung a baton, catching me hard in the ribs. Pain exploded through me, but I kept moving. I grabbed his arm, twisting until I heard a sickening snap. He howled in agony and crumpled to the ground. Victor watched it all, calm and almost amused. When it was over, I stood there, panting, blood dripping from my hands. Victor clapped slowly, his smile predatory. "Impressive," he said, "but this changes nothing." I raised the knife, ready to end it, but before I could move, a sharp pain shot through my neck. My vision blurred, and the world tilted. Victor stepped closer, his voice echoing in my mind as everything faded to black. "Good night, Ethan." Kane wasn't just a man, he was the puppet master of a vast network, a web of connections built on favors and dependencies. I started tracking down the names tied to his so-called events, property managers, security firms, and anyone else who might have a link to his operations. A few well-placed bribes and some anonymous calls to federal agencies were all it took to start unraveling his empire. His offshore accounts got frozen, his front companies flagged for investigation, and his partner started scrambling. It was a small start, just enough to make him uncomfortable, but not enough to let him know it was me. Step 2 hit him where it hurts. Kane's mansion wasn't just a house, it was his pride, a fortress where he hosted his twisted escapades, but even fortresses have vulnerabilities. During my brief visit, I'd spotted the backup generators tucked into an outdoor utility shed. If I could take those offline, his entire security system would go dark. I returned to the estate under the cover of night, armed with a homemade EMP device and enough gasoline to light the place up. The plan was simple: fry the electronics, burn it to the ground, and send Kane a message he couldn't ignore. The EMP worked like a charm. The mansion plunged into darkness, alarms silenced, cameras dead. I moved swiftly, sticking to the shadows as I planted gasoline-soaked rags at key spots around the property. When the flames erupted, the fire reflected in my eyes felt almost cathartic. The mansion stood ablaze against the night sky, its grandeur reduced to ash. But this was just the beginning. Step 3, the hammer falls. Of course, Kane retaliated. I knew he would. He sent 2 goons to talk to me, a polite way of saying they were there to beat me to a pulp. But I wasn't the same man I used to be. When they cornered me in my driveway, I was ready. The first guy went down fast, one swing of a crowbar to his knee, and his scream pierced the night. The second got a face full of pepper spray before I slammed his head into the pavement. I left one of them alive, just barely, and sent him back with a message for Kane: you're next. Step 4, the final play. The thing about men like Kane is they never expect someone to bring the fight to their doorstep. I studied him, learning everything I could about his schedule, habits and weaknesses. It all pointed to one place: a private yacht moored at a secluded marina. That floating palace was where Kane conducted his most secretive business. Breaking onto the yacht was easier than I anticipated. His guards were too busy partying with the guests to notice me slipping aboard with a duffel bag full of homemade explosives. On the lower deck, I found the control room where the ship's systems were managed. In under 5 minutes, I'd wired the explosives and set the timer for 20 minutes. On my way to the upper deck, I heard voices, one of them unmistakably Kane's smooth, arrogant tone. I couldn't resist. I stepped into the lounge, and there he was, sprawled across a white leather couch, champagne in hand, surrounded by scantily clad guests. His smirk was pure venom. Ethan, he greeted me, his tone dripping with mockery. I've been expecting you. The room went silent as everyone turned to stare. Victor, I said, keeping my voice steady. You've taken everything from me. Now it's my turn. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross his face. You think you can stop me? He sneered, trying to hold on to his composure. You're nothing. I stepped closer, pulling out the detonator linked to the explosives. I don't have to stop you, I said, locking eyes with him. I just have to sink you. The realization hit the room like a bombshell. Guests screamed and scrambled as Kane's mask of confidence cracked. You're bluffing, he said, his voice shaking. I pressed the button. The explosion tore through the yacht, splitting it in half as flames engulfed the night sky. I dove into the water just before the blast, the shockwave propelling me forward. Gasping for air, I swam to shore, my lungs burning, the sounds of chaos fading behind me. When I climbed onto the rocky beach, I turned back to watch the inferno. Kane's empire wasn't just sinking, it was gone, reduced to ash and smoke. Epilogue. They never found his body. Maybe he drowned, maybe he didn't. It didn't matter. His mansion was gone, his yacht destroyed, and his empire in ruins. But for all the destruction, I never got closure. Elena. Yes, disappearance haunted me. I searched the remains of the mansion, combed through every lead I could find, but she was just gone. Maybe she was dead. Maybe she'd escaped. I'll never know. For the first time in years, I felt a twisted sense of freedom, but it was hollow. The scars Kane left behind refused to heal, and Elena. Yes, absence was a weight I couldn't shake. What hurt even more was facing her family. I thought they deserved the truth, no matter how ugly. But when I drove to her parents' house, I was met with something I didn't expect: contempt. Elena. Mother, Marjorie, greeted me with cold eyes, her hand gripping the doorframe like she might slam it in my face. Haven't you done enough? She said, her voice sharp with accusation. I blinked, taken aback. What are you talking about? You let her walk into that nightmare, she spat, her eyes blazing. You let her fall in with those people. Her words hit me like a punch. Marjorie, she made her choices. I tried to stop her, but she... Don't, she snapped, cutting me off. You think we don't know what kind of man you are. Always controlling, always pushing her away. If she's gone, it's because you drove her to it. Her venomous words stung. I wanted to argue, to scream that she didn't know the half of it, but the bitterness in her tone froze the words in my throat. She's gone, I said finally, my voice trembling. And you're blaming me. She's gone because of you, she hissed, slamming the door in my face. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, her words echoing in my head. Maybe she was right. Maybe I could have done more, been better. But as doubt gnawed at me, another thought surfaced. What if they knew more than they were letting on? If Elena had been drawn into that world, it wasn't entirely on her. Her family played a part, and if they wouldn't help me willingly, I'd have to uncover the truth myself. Step 1, digging into the past. Marjorie and her husband, Edward, always paraded themselves as upstanding, church-going people. But as I dug deeper, I uncovered cracks in their facade. Marjorie had been tied to a local charity that quietly shut down after allegations of embezzlement. Edward, on the other hand, had a gambling habit that nearly cost them their home. They weren't as clean as they pretended to be. The real breakthrough came when I hacked into Elena's old email account. I'd sworn to myself I'd never do that, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Buried among the usual mundane emails was a chain from her sister, Sophia. Be careful with Victor, one message read. Mom and Dad don't like you getting involved with him. He's dangerous. Mom and Dad, they knew. Step 2, cornering Sophia. Sophia worked at a boutique downtown, selling overpriced scarves and jewelry. I found her there, arranging the window display. She looked startled when she saw me, though she quickly masked it with a strained smile. Ethan, she said, her voice oozing fake concern. How are you holding up? Cut the crap, I said, stepping closer. You knew about Victor Kane, your parents knew, and none of you warned me. Her face paled. I don't know what you're talking about. I grabbed her wrist, leaning in close so no one could overhear. Don't lie to me, Sophia. Elena. Yes, gone because of him. And if you don't start talking, I'll make sure the police start digging into all of you. Her tough exterior cracked. All right, just let go. I released her, and she rubbed her wrist, glaring at me. We didn't say anything because we didn't want to get involved, she admitted. Victor, he has people everywhere. Powerful people. Mom and Dad were terrified. Terrified of what I asked, my stomach turning. Sophia hesitated, then lowered her voice. Of what he'd do to us if we crossed him. Elena thought she could handle him, but when she started talking about leaving. Why didn't you go to the police, I demanded, my voice rising. You don't understand, Sophia said, her tone almost pleading. Victor had leverage on all of us. If we talked, he'd ruin us. Step 3, the family's price. Sophia's confession gave me the leverage I needed to put the screws on Marjorie and Edward. I started small, leaking details of their shady dealings to local reporters. When the stories hit the news, they pathened, scrambling to control the damage. Then I sent an anonymous tip to the IRS about Edward's gambling debts and undeclared income. A few days later, federal agents showed up at their house with subpoenas. The final blow came in the form of Sophia's email chain. I sent Marjorie a copy, along with a simple note, tell the truth, or this goes public. Step 4, the confrontation. Marjorie called me that night, her voice trembling. What do you want from us, she asked. The truth, I said coldly. What happened to Elena? There was a long pause, then a broken sigh. She's dead, Marjorie whispered. Victor killed her. I closed my eyes as the words hit me like a freight train. And you did nothing, I said, my voice shaking. We couldn't, she cried. He said if we went to the police, he'd kill us too. He showed us pictures, videos. He has people everywhere. We were just trying to survive. I hung up, disgusted. They might have been scared, but their cowardice had cost Elena her life. Step 5, the end game. Marjorie and Edward thought the worst was over. They were wrong. They had betrayed Elena, abandoned her to a monster, and I wasn't going to let them escape unscathed. I leaked everything, details of their involvement with Victor, their silence about Elena, yes, death, their financial crimes. Within weeks, their lives were in ruins. The community turned against them. Their house was seized. They were pariahs. Sophia skipped town, but I tracked her down too, making sure she knew she wasn't safe from the truth. When it was all over, I stood outside the wreckage of their lives, feeling nothing but emptiness. Elena was gone, and no amount of revenge would bring her back, but at least they'd paid for their cowardice. After dismantling Victor Kane's empire and ruining Elena. Yes, family, I thought the fire inside me would finally burn out. I thought I'd find peace, but there was none. The whole Elena theft was too deep, and the truths I'd uncovered were too ugly to ignore. Victor Kane might have been destroyed, but his shadow lingered, and there was one final thread to pull. The video. It all came together the day I found a package on my doorstep. No return address, just a plain manila envelope. Inside was a USB drive. My instincts screamed that it was a trap, but I couldn't ignore it. I plugged it into my laptop, and the screen flickered to life. It was Elena. She was in a dimly lit room, the same basement I'd seen on Victor's monitor. Her face was pale, her lips trembling as she spoke. If you're seeing this, she said, tears streaming down her face. Then I didn't make it out. My heart stopped. They're going to kill me, she continued, because I know too much. I thought I could handle it, but I was wrong. Victor, he's worse than I ever imagined. He uses people, breaks them, and when they're no longer useful. She trailed off, staring into the camera with haunted eyes. Ethan, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm sorry I was so angry at you. At us. That I didn't see what I was walking into. I thought I needed freedom, but all I found was hell. I love you. I always did. Please, make sure he pays. The screen went black. The video shattered something inside me, but it also gave me a renewed purpose. Victor Kane wasn't dead. I'd destroyed his empire, but the man himself had slipped through my fingers. That had to change. It took months to track him down. Tracking Victor down wasn't easy. He had vanished into the shadows, hiding behind layers of fake identities and offshore accounts. But desperation makes people careless, and I found him in a crumbling villa on the outskirts of Cartagena, Colombia. He was living like a ghost, surrounded by a skeleton crew of enforcers who still clung to his power. This time I wasn't the man who had foolishly underestimated him. I came armed and ready, a Glock, a combat knife, and enough explosives to level his hideout. The final confrontation. I breached the villa just before dawn. The guards were no match for me. Each step I took was precise, fueled by months of planning and relentless anger. Every bullet I fired was a punctuation mark in the sentence of his destruction. When I found him, Victor was hunched over a desk in a study, cluttered with maps and documents. His head snapped up when he saw me. For a brief moment, fear flickered in his eyes before it morphed into his trademark arrogance. Ethan, he said, standing slowly, you're persistent, I'll give you that. But you've already lost, Elena. That's gone. What more could you possibly want? I raised the gun, aiming squarely at his chest. Her justice, I said coldly, and your life. He smirked, that familiar condescension creeping back. You think killing me will change anything? I'm just one man. There will always be more like me. Maybe, I replied, stepping closer. But there won't be you. Before I could pull the trigger, Victor lunged. Faster than I'd expected, he knocked me off balance, and we crashed to the ground. The gun skidded out of reach as he pummeled me, his fists landing brutal blows against my ribs and face. But I wasn't the same man he'd faced before. I fought back with everything I had, driving my elbow into his throat and scrambling for the knife strapped to my belt. With a roar, I plunged it into his side, the blade sinking deep. Victor gasped, his eyes wide with shock and pain. This is for her, I growled, twisting the knife. The detonation. Leaving him bleeding out on the floor, I activated the timer on the explosives I had planted throughout the villa. His gasps and curses echoed behind me as I made my way to the edge of the property. Moments later, the villa erupted in a fiery explosion that lit up the dawn, consuming everything he had built. The epilogue, the fallout. When I returned home, I wasn't the same man. My vengeance was complete, but my soul was in ruins. There were no more enemies to destroy, no one left to blame. The world moved on. Elena. This case was eventually ruled unsolvable. Her parents disappeared, unable to bear the weight of their shame. Sophia's trail went cold. As for me, I lived in the quiet aftermath, haunted by ghosts of what I'd lost and what I'd done. But through it all, one image remained burned into my memory: Elena. Looking into the camera, her tear-streaked face and trembling voice saying those final words. Make sure he pays. And I had. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales. Your support means the world. Thank you for watching.